Disney. What are we going to do with you? So, we've got some information about what is going on at Disney lately. In terms of shifting of plans, we've had some new projects announced. A little bit more, not too much concrete about at least what is going to be scaling back, if not exactly in what way or what shape that might end up taking. But speaking as somebody old enough to remember the Disney Renaissance of the early 90s, I cannot help but get a certain sense of déjà vu with the company having had a big bump of like a lot of gains, just doing really well, and then squandering it and overextending, overspending, assuming that everything would just keep going great and until it didn't. And in this case, Disney's been on a much longer winning streak than they were from that 90s Disney's Renaissance. I don't want to downplay that. Like, that was vital. Disney needed that. But also, it's worth remembering that in terms of overall stuff, while Disney is usually in the conversation, at least on channels like this, for its entertainment output, it has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies. And having stuff for the movies not do as well, while it's not good, that's not going to sink the company. They are not solely an entertainment company. They are frustrating. Well, I say entertainment. They're not solely a movie studio. Let's go with that. And that's frustrating in a lot of ways. They are apparently trying to expand into video games again. Because if you didn't know, they tried to do this before. They actually formed their own studios. That didn't end up well. They're not doing that this time. Instead, they are getting a massive equity stake in Epic, the creators of Fortnite. In a way, this is not particularly surprising given the way that some Disney properties have been integrated in Fortnite. It seems that at the very least, they have a decent working relationship. Whether or not Disney will make a move down the line to try and buy Epic outright, maybe. There might be enough people at the company that remembered that the last time they tried to actually own a video game studio of their own, it just became a money pit. So there might be enough people still there who remember that they won't go that way. But clearly, they're doing all these things. And at the same time, let's not forget, last few months, they've laid off about 7,000 people. So they are doing what pretty much all major corporate entities have been doing lately, which is that we got to cut costs, which means firing a whole mass of people who we hired when times were good. Of course, none of it is those people's faults, yet they are now going to be out of work, whereas the people who made the decisions that actually resulted in things not working out as well, they get to keep their positions and their bonuses and all the rest of that. But capitalism's broken. We know this already. Moving forward. So specifically, what has Disney and Bob Iger in specific said that they're doing that has me rolling my eyes going, does nobody remember anything anymore? Well, Bob Iger, he had an investor call and then he had a Q&A where he noted a number of things. As he had kind of alluded to before, there was a notion of scaling back Marvel. Although some of what he has been saying is, in a way, almost a little bit contradictory, but in a way that actually makes perfect sense to me. And I'll explain that in a minute. But he said, we kind of overdid it with Marvel. We did too much of similar stuff. And he also says that maybe they introduced too much new stuff and maybe they need to be shifting back to the Avengers structure a bit again, which is interesting because he also expressed the sentiment like you need to know when to stop. Do we need a fourth sequel, a fifth sequel? That's really odd coming from him, given the additions to Disney's movie slate that have been announced, which, if you missed that, this summer we're getting Inside Out 2. In November, we are getting Moana 2. Stick a pin in that, we'll come back to it. 2025 will bring Zootopia 2. And then 2026 is Frozen 3, Toy Story 5, and The Mandalorian and Grogu. Okay, so I said stick a pin in Moana 2. Let's come back to it right off the bat. There was some confusion initially when this got announced that was this like a secret sequel they were working on the whole time? No, actually what this was the Moana streaming series that got announced back in 2020. The official line is this is good enough that we should push it a little bit further, retool it into a movie, and actually put it in theaters. That's the official line. They're going to be doing something similar with at least one Marvel series, Armor Wars, possibly with some of the others as well, but at the very least with that one. So we'll see when this thing actually hits theaters if it has the appearance of something that, oh, yeah, they were right, this is good enough, or if it has the feel of, oh, you are just trying to shift your money around because the streaming is becoming a money pit, which I've talked about before. That is a money pit for basically every company that isn't Netflix and Hulu. But the thing is, I also don't want to completely discount the idea that maybe this was good enough, because I'm going to circle back to what went on in the 90s. But if you didn't know, Toy Story 2 was going to be a direct-to-home video release, like most Disney sequels at that point. But as they went, they realized how good it was and thought, no, we should put this in the theaters. So there is some precedent for that, but I'm not sure how much I trust that that's what's actually motivating the shift, or at least that's almost certainly not the only thing that's motivating the shift. It might still be really good. We don't know. It's worth noting, this does not mean they aren't still doing the live action Moana remake. That is still in the cards in addition to all the rest of this. As for Zootopia 2, seeing that on the docket reminded me that a Zootopia streaming series actually came out. I forgot that it had. I never watched it. I don't know anyone who did. I don't know anyone who talked about it. Maybe it was good. I don't know. Again, Disney really doesn't seem to know how to handle the streaming. Again, to be fair, almost nobody does. But Bob Iger, even though he said, as I mentioned before, we need to ask, do we need a fourth sequel, a fifth sequel, etc.? At the same time, he also is freely admitting that they are leaning on sequels more and that sequels do well for them. And that apparent contradiction kind of actually sums up the position Disney is currently in, which is that going by the numbers, they do get better return, especially recently, on sequels. Because the original stuff that's been coming out lately hasn't been doing great. And again, you can chalk that up to bad marketing. The head over at Pixar has actually said that one of the mistakes that happened during the pandemic was training audiences that it's in the theaters now, but it's going to be on streaming in a few months. Just wait for it. And that was likely at least part of the issue with the underperforming of things like Lightyear and Strange New World. And while Elemental eventually managed to make a profit because it ended up having some legs, it still underperformed from what it was expected to have done. So original stuff has not been going great for them lately, and even semi-original stuff, which I would consider things like The Marvels to be, frankly, because that is pushing characters that have been introduced on streaming who hadn't been on the big screen yet. Yes, it is kind of technically a sequel to Captain Marvel, but they did it under new branding, so they were trying to push it as a new thing, and that underperformed very badly. I still haven't seen it. I should. I honestly have no idea whether I'll like it or not, but it definitely didn't perform particularly well. And that was sort of marketed as if it was more of a new thing, and that didn't really seem to help it. So you get his inclination on leaning more on sequels, but at the same time, he appears to recognize that there's been an oversaturation, and that is the situation Disney is in. The sequels make more money, but people are also getting tired of the sequels. How do you balance that? Well, apparently what they're going to try to do is simply do fewer things in general, or like scale back the frequency and the release of these things, and then continue to do primarily sequel output. And I mentioned I'm getting flashbacks to the 90s with a lot of this, because I think about films like Zootopia and like Moana and all these other things that are getting these sequels, or they had streaming series follow-ups Big Hero 6 had one of those, or had two of those, actually. Well, one was streaming, one was actually Disney Channel. But I'm thinking about those things, and I'm getting flashbacks to the 90s. So the 90s, that was the introduction of Disney animated sequels. Their first ever animated sequel was The Rescuers Down Under. And I think that actually might have been late 80s, technically. But that came out, that was put in theaters. It's very good. I like that one a lot. I like it more than the original Rescuers, certainly. But it didn't perform great. And that made Disney at the time very wary of sequels. But at the same time, they saw how popular these Renaissance films were and were going, well, we should do something. The kicker might have been the fact that Robin Williams was ticked off at Disney and Jeffrey Katzenberg in particular and refused to come back for the Genie. And once they realized they weren't going to get Robin Williams back, any plans for an Aladdin sequel was like, well, I guess we might as well just release it on home video then, because without Robin Williams, I'm not sure it's worth sinking the money in it to get it theatrically ready. And that also, coincidentally, well, not coincidentally, by design, led in to a Aladdin animated TV series, which was also very common for the time. Hercules had an ongoing TV series. The Little Mermaid had a TV series. Beauty and the Beast had multiple direct-to-home video sequels, and it was recognized later on that while this did bring in a decent amount of additional revenue, especially considering they didn't spend nearly as much money on these, it was eventually recognized that this was diluting the brands. While people could make a distinction between the quality of what was released in theaters and what was coming out on these other mediums, it was sort of making people go, oh, all right, so there's just a lot more of it. And unfortunately, despite Bob Iger being Michael Eisner's protege, more or less, he seemed to take the wrong lessons from that. He seemed to think that the only issue with what happened under Eisner with all those TV series and sequels was that the quality dip from the theatrical releases to these home releases and the sequels and the shows was too great. They weren't good enough. He doesn't, or at least until recently, he did not seem to take into account the idea that the oversaturation is a problem regardless of quality. Now, that's not to defend the quality of everything that's been coming out, especially on streaming. This is part of the inherent issue with trying to run a streaming service. You need a lot of stuff on there, and you need to keep bringing out new stuff. And the pace at which they were doing it just led to increasingly shoddy products. I would honestly call Secret Invasion kind of the culmination of that. That thing was a mess. In terms of the writing, it was a mess. In terms of the presentation, it was not good. The special effects clearly did not have enough time. Like, that felt like all the chickens coming home to roost on that. While it is true that the Marvel streaming shows have seen an overall decline in quality, broadly speaking, I do think some of the later stuff has been better. I liked Echo more than I liked some of the, actually a fair bit of the earlier Marvel streaming stuff. But while I'm not going to say that the quality has been as high as it was with the earlier theatrical releases, it really does appear like Iger and other executives thought that, well, if we make it look like the films and we bring in the same people who the audiences are used to seeing in the films, that'll be enough. We don't have to worry about the oversaturation because the quality drop will not be as drastic as it was with our 90s direct-to-home video sequels. Even if the quality drop, you know, you can debate how big or small that was. And at this point, you can also debate whether or not the movies have dropped in quality in a similar level. But the quality drop alone was not the problem. You can have too much of a good thing. Like, fundamentally, this is what happens when the numbers drive the decisions. What gets us highest return on investment? Okay, do more of that. Sequels get us a higher return on investment. Continuations of known brands and big franchises get us a higher return on investment more consistently than anything new. Cool, do more of it. The problem is, unless you know how to factor oversaturation into that, all you're going to do is release a bunch of stuff that maybe if you'd paced it out and had other stuff in between it would be a big hit, but you've just crammed it all together and now people are exhausted and aren't going to the theater and are taking in your streaming service that you've now added ads to, you greedy sons of... Okay, moving again. Capitalism is broken, but Disney has found itself in a bit of a trap right now because they followed the numbers for a while, and the numbers did well. But the problem with the way that they were looking at, the problem with crunching the numbers, basically kind of deciding what you're going to do by algorithm. I'm not literally accusing Disney of plugging their return metrics into an algorithm and doing what it said, but the decisions that have been made, not only by Disney, but that's who we're talking about right now, have very much resembled what an algorithm would do. Plug in the information. Here's what's made us money in the past. What should we do? And what an algorithm will tell you is do more of what made you the most money. And that's what Disney has been doing. The thing is, that only works if you assume that that thing works forever. Like, yeah, you'll continue to get higher revenue for a while, but one of the fundamental things that not only Disney, not only entertainment industries, like most industries seem to not do at all anymore, is ever factor in the idea that the numbers will go down. And so when they do, well, we need to restructure. We need to cancel these things. We need to lay off 7,000 people. Why did you build everything assuming the line would only ever go up and not think for maybe a frickin' second, will we be okay if things dip a little bit? Can we afford to fail at all? And maybe they did, but if they did, what they failed to account for is so much of what they were doing was all the same thing that if it started to fail, it was all going to start to fail. And again, fail is an exaggerated term in this. Disney is fine. They are making money, just not as much as they want to, not as much as their shareholders want them to. The shareholders being the actual customers, or at least closer to being the actual customers than the paying customers are, at any rate. One could argue the true customers of any large business are, in fact, the CEOs and the executives. At the very least, they do attempt to appeal to the shareholders. Certainly a heck of a lot more than they really care about what we do, other than what money we spend. And yeah, I keep circling back onto capitalism is broken, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but it is, and that's the world we are frickin' stuck in. And I think it's very telling that we're starting to get sequels to things that were very clearly designed to be standalone stories. Because, like, you could make an argument at the end of the first Toy Story, while it was not designed to have sequels, there's plenty more stories to be told with those characters, with that setting, with that world. But you look at Inside Out, that was a complete story. First Frozen, complete story. Moana, complete story. It's not designed to have sequels. Now, some things not designed to have sequels can still have them, but the fact that that's what they're going to, and even with Toy Story, which has had sequels before, has had successful sequels before, and speaking as a skeptic who thought the very notion of Toy Story 4 was a horrible idea because the third one was such a good ending, I actually ended up really liking 4. At this point, I liked 4 more than 3, but it was a great coda, and it fully wrapped up Woody's story. And you're gonna do another one? Even with Frozen, which has had a sequel before, the first Frozen, yeah, there's maybe more things you can look into, but that first Frozen was so tight thematically. Everything tied together for its primary themes and what it was doing. And the second one was not made to deliver themes. It had themes, but they were bolted on because it needed to be a sequel to their biggest financial success for an animated film in the theatrical release ever. You can tell, while everything that Disney or any company puts out is intended to make money, you can tell when making money is the only reason. Because there is a difference between we have a pitch and a concept that we think will be successful, and the people, you know, the purse holders, the purse string holders going, okay, we think we can make money off that. There's a difference between that and being told, we need to make a sequel to that because it will definitely make money. And then trying to, after the fact, figure out a justification for what it is you're doing and why. Can it sometimes produce good work? Yeah. But you're fundamentally starting on the back foot, artistically speaking, because you're not here because you had a story or a concept or a theme or a character arc that you were passionate about. You're here because the purse string holders told you do it. And now you have to figure out, is there anything we can do with this? And maybe they will, maybe they won't. But in a world where it's sequel after sequel, continuation, spin-off, cinematic universe after cinematic universe, remakes, I don't know why I thought, I could have sworn that I'd seen somewhere that Bob Iger wanted to lay off the live action remakes. I must have dreamed that he ever said that, because they're still happening. I don't know how to fix this. I mean, like, personally, I can't. But, like, if I were in Bob Iger's position, I wouldn't know how to fix this, strictly because we are in a situation now in late stage capitalism where the line is not allowed to go down. And if it has gone down, fire people, restructure, and promise that it'll go up again next year. And honestly, the things that would be healthiest for the company in terms of its output, finding its footing again, would be flat out saying, we intend to make less money over the next 4 years while we experiment with some new things and take the pressure off of the film and streaming divisions and let them settle in and get their footing again before we ramp things up. But you can't do that. You can't go to your shareholders and say, we anticipate 4 years of lower revenue than we had a year ago. You can't do that. They will flee, or at least enough of them will, that it creates effectively a death spiral. Whether or not Disney, at least the entertainment industry, is already in a little bit of a failure spiral is debatable, and we'll end up seeing. Will it be enough to simply slow down their output? I don't know. That will help, honestly. I do think that will, in fact, help, because one of the big issues, especially for Marvel, is a Marvel release doesn't feel special anymore. I would say the last Marvel release that felt like an event was Spider-Man No Way Home. I think that was the last time it felt special. And while I've enjoyed some of the Marvel stuff that's happened since then, it's so frequent. I didn't really like this one. Oh, well, there's another thing out next month. This one's on streaming. That one was in the theater. And some are good, some aren't. But when there's that much, it's hard to get excited. You know, it's like going to nothing but burger restaurants for every dinner. It's like, some of these burgers are good, some of them aren't so good. Maybe you're just tired of burgers. And even if you have a good burger, are you going to get excited about it at this point, when that's what you're having day after day after day after day? And Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm going to be real curious to see how they market that thing, because I think that has the potential to be a massive pitfall for them, because that's a direct continuation of a streaming series that you're putting in theaters. And as a rule of thumb, theatrical continuations of television series, generally the most you're going to get are the people who liked the show in the first place coming to the theater. But presumably part of why you put it on streaming in the first place was you didn't think it had the legs to make it in the theater. I mean, granted, there's also the format difference. But also, even though Disney will have the streaming numbers for how popular The Mandalorian is, we won't. They don't tell us. They really should be required to do that, for the record, the way that broadcast television is. But they may have the numbers, but they may well be walking into the trap of assuming that everyone who watches it on streaming would just as willingly go to a movie theater to see it. That's a big assumption. Because if you've already paid for your subscription to Disney for that month, then effectively it costs you nothing extra to decide to watch that over anything else. That does not mean you're going to go and pay, I don't know, $15 for a movie theater ticket and $30 on snacks to go see more of it in a theater. But they're kind of assuming you will. And I could be wrong about that. Maybe The Mandalorian does have that dedicated a fan base. I'm not sure it does. But again, the healthiest thing this company could do is slow down, but they can't. Everything has to get bigger. Everything has to be more profitable. Every year, revenue has to go up. And if it doesn't, well, drastic nonsense. And then you have to get it back up the next year. You can't have a lull that appears to be anything other than a fluke. And while Disney is a really easy one to raise an eyebrow at right now, the others are going to be hitting this. Like Warner Brothers Discovery is pinning so much on James Gunn's DC movies. And to be honest, even if they're good, I don't know if it's been long enough since the previous MCU movies for audiences to miss it. Maybe, but they're banking a lot on that. It's all just a mess. Mistakes are being repeated. This oversaturation, this just pump out more of the thing that made us money last time. Like, okay, yes, but in theory, that should be like your stable thing. That's the thing we can count on while we find other new things for when this eventually runs out. But they're not finding new things. The closest they're doing to finding new things are different expansions of the MCU and Star Wars, but it's still the MCU and Star Wars. Like, I'm not going to say there's no truth to the idea that people miss Tony Stark and miss Captain America. There's some truth to that, sure. But giving us Ms. Marvel, giving us Moon Knight, giving us Armor Wars is not substantively different. Some of these are different characters that we haven't seen before, sure, but it's the same world. It has a fundamentally similar feeling, and same with Star Wars. The only Star Wars thing in a while that has felt, to me at least, substantively different, and when I say feel, I'm not talking about quality. The quality's been all over the place, but like has had a substantive different feel. This feels like it's doing something different than what is normal for Star Wars to do, was Andor. So they got lucky once, but that is something with a fixed shelf life, because they said at the beginning we're only doing 2 seasons, and they appear to be sticking with that. I don't know what to say other than I feel like I'm just going to keep watching these companies make the same mistakes. Does this mean like, oh, it's doomed? No. It's too big. It's too expansive. They're too rich. No, it's not doomed. Is it not doing what the shareholders and the CEOs want? Oh, yeah. And that'll probably be the case for a little bit. But this is not a Disney is dead channel. And it never will be. I lived through the years when Disney very nearly almost did actually stop putting out animated films or films at all. They were considering it. I was around for that. This is not that. But they haven't had a major lull in a long time. And it's very clear they didn't have a plan for what would happen when it did. Because lulls are inevitable. The line can't always go up forever. There's going to be a dip, just by law of probability, if nothing else. But they don't plan for it anymore. And we get an announcement of a ton of sequels and layoffs and major stakes in video game companies. And every time I see this stuff, I just roll my eyes and go, okay, so that's what you're doing now. Fine. It's just exhausting. But I had enough thoughts on it that I needed to get them out of me before I go away for the weekend. Because if you are going to be at the Gallifrey 1 convention in Los Angeles this weekend, I will also be there. Feel free to say hi. But I needed to get this out of my head before I finish packing. But in any case, what are your thoughts on all this? It was a bit rambly. I know. It's me. Unless you're new here, you probably expected that. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. And even if you can't help me out that way, there's links to other things in the description, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And I'd like to thank my highest supporting patrons, Robin Moore, Zubin Mutfullah, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Geek Filter, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Frenobulax, The Poodle, Robin Powell, T Love, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Pal Barabajagal, and Mara G. Yes, we do have new rats in the house. Whoa, you want it? We actually have two. This is Brownie. I couldn't get Sprite to come out, but say hi. Thanks for the support.